What does successful reentry really take, and why do so few get the chance? In this episode, Mark Wilson reflects on his first 6 months of freedom after nearly 40 years in prison and exposes the broken systems waiting on the outside. From inaccessible housing to bureaucratic cruelty, we explore why Oregon's reentry process fails so many and what it would take to build one rooted in dignity and support. Coming up next on Trailblazing Justice. This is Trailblazing Justice, episode 73, recorded Thursday, July 17, 2025. Coming home isn't always easy. It's time for Trailblazing Justice, the weekly podcast where we discuss civil and criminal rights in Oregon and beyond. Trailblazing Justice is a production of the Oregon Justice Resource Center. Here's Bobbin.
Welcome back to another episode of Trailblazing Justice. I'm Bobbin Singh, the Executive Director of the Oregon Justice Resource Center. And today we're back with our core podcast crew. I'm joined by Zach Winston, the Director of Policy and Outreach, and Mark Wilson, legal assistant paraprofessional with the organization. You guys want to say hi real quick?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hope everyone's doing well.
All right. Well, it's good to be back with the both of you. Last couple of weeks we had Steve Wax on for his segments called Waxing Confidential. We'll be back, I think, next week with another episode of Waxing Confidential. And then hopefully in the next week or so, we'll be able to do a follow-up conversation on solitary confinement where we'll have Ben, Hale, and Mark talk us through some of the social science that's out there about solitary confinement. And that'll be part of the series that we've had ongoing. But today, I last minute asked Mark if he could talk to us about reentry. Mark was, as you know, recently released from prison after a number of years, over 3 decades, nearly 4 decades in prison. And I kind of wanted to I was just curious about sort of the experiences of reentry, like what you've seen, your own experiences, and then talking about it in a way of, we criticize and we comment and we talk about prison and how all the deficits with it, and that at our core, we are for the abolition of the current structures. I use this word abolition to talk about that we're talking about the value systems that sort of drive incarceration and mass incarceration, and that's what we want to attack and put in its place something else that actually, highlights like dignity and compassion and equitable treatment of individuals. So I guess, Mark, just to start off, like how have the last 6 months been for you?
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride.
Yeah.
It's been 6 months and it feels like I've put about 6 years worth of living into that 6 months.
Yeah, I'll say as 2 offices down from you and sort of witnessing it does feel like you've packed in, I'd say like a decade of life the past 6 months. With all the things that you're doing, I get the text messages from this place or this event or that event, and it just feels like, you're really just out there and in a really great and amazing way, kind of engaging with the community and life. Before we sort of dig deeper into this conversation, is there anything that's been sort of like a highlight for you these past 6 months, or a series of highlights? I know you spent time with your family. That always has to be a highlight, I imagine, but anything that sticks out to you?
For sure. I would say that the time that I've been able to spend with my family that, both they and I thought would never happen, has been, the number one blessing. But there's been so many other things that, just been really remarkable that I've been allowed to be involved in, work here, working with kids in the community and continuing to help people that are coming out. And it's just been really good to just kind of honestly, we say it inside. I'm going to say it here, to feel the boot off my neck, and it's nice to be able to feel like I can breathe and be just a normal citizen, and nobody is, gauging, who I am and, judging me and all that stuff throughout the day. It's just, I'm just another person walking down the street, and it's really nice to just feel that weight lift off you and just be able to be there's times where, I've been out, walking in the park at 10 o'clock at night and being able to look at the stars and the moon in the sky, and just like, for decades that wasn't possible, and I thought it would never be possible. And so there's those things that I'm doing that are nothing, but then I get hit by that when I'm doing it and going, oh wow, this is one of those moments, it just really overwhelms you, and it comes out of nowhere a lot of times, but it's really nice. These simple things that we take for granted, that it's nice to remember, that I shouldn't take those things for granted,
Yeah, I mean that is I always forget about that. There's someone that works with us, and when I was talking with him about one of the things that was something that he had to get used to, which I always maybe I mentioned this before, but he said for him one of the things he had to get used to was walking up and down hills, and I just never had thought about that because
Yeah,
it's true.
for sure.
It's just a flat surface, concrete
Yeah.
surface you're on, and he would talk about how he would get a little bit of what's that with the inner ear stuff, the
Vertigo.
vertigo from walking
Yeah.
up and down hills
Interesting.
initially. Yeah.
Huh.
But yeah, I think those things like looking at the stars, I know many of the guys that I've spoken with at OSCI talk about that, about how, you can't go out at night and just look at the stars. And yeah, that is something. Have there been any, I don't know, surprises, anything that you've been surprised by in the past 6 months that you weren't expecting as far as when you were getting out, like just, I don't know, some anecdote of something that was just like, whoa, this is different, or this is not something I thought I would have to do or need to do, or some experience that I would have that I'm getting to have.
I don't know that I felt it as surprise. I mean, I guess one thing I guess I was surprised by is how I was expecting, supervision to be a lot more difficult than it's been. And so that was a pleasant surprise, I guess. And another thing that I wouldn't call it a surprise, but it's something that it's like I'm constantly like struggling with, is just like the technology and just trying to learn this stuff. And it's like constantly, being like a baby in the world and having to have people explain stupid things to me that, it's just, but
Yeah.
there's just a lot of that you just can't.
Yeah.
It takes a long time to figure out.
Yeah. I mean, I think like for us who haven't experienced sort of that deprivation, the technology moves, but it's sort of immersed in your everyday use and you get kind of used to it, and familiar with it. And it's like just instinctive, some of the things that we can do, like when we pick up a phone or a computer, like they're just these things that we just learn behavior, you just kind of know. On the other hand, I'll say technology is also moving at a rate that's hard to keep up with anyway. So, it's like every other week or month there's something that's coming up that even for me, I will say it's very difficult to keep up with. So yeah, I can imagine the challenges with technology can be overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah. I guess another thing is the thing that surprises me, I guess, or maybe surprise is the wrong word, concerns me a little bit, but I need to be patient with myself. Even now at 6 months out, I feel like um, my psyche hasn't calmed down enough. My brain hasn't calmed down enough for me to be able to sit and watch a series on like Netflix, or to read a book, or to actually write something. And those are all things that I did inside every day. It was nothing at all. And so now I'm out here and I'm like, it's just, it's been a little concerning at times that it hasn't, calmed down, but I look back and it has calmed. It just hasn't calmed enough yet, and so I'm like, okay, I wonder how long that's going to take before I'm able to just kind of be truly relaxed, and so it's interesting to watch that kind of take place.
Yeah. Do you think that's because of like that you have more stimulation in your environments now? There's just more around you that is like activating, your senses, or is that just you think, just I don't know, like
Making
you have
up for
yeah,
lost time.
yeah.
No, yeah, I think it probably is just a lot of stimulation where there was none before. And that those things that I was talking about doing inside were the only stimulation inside, probably. And so, but I noticed when I first got out, it's like my mind was like flitting like to 20 different things, and I couldn't focus in on one thing, right? And now it's like, okay, two or three things are doing that at once, or maybe four, but it's like, so it feels like more than just stimulation. It feels like I'm just not calm, like I felt like I was calm before. And so I think that is probably the stimulation, but probably, I don't know what exactly, is going on with the nervous system with all that stuff. But, obviously I think it's just a process that I think we all go through.
I know, like for you, you've been fortunate due to, I think, a loving family, good community, your hard work, your own sort of way in which you dealt with incarceration and approached it, that when you came out, you had what you would call more of a soft landing on reentry. You had a job, some funds, a home, those types of things, a loving, a family that was around you. And I guess I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into, I mean, you would see people release into the community from inside the prison. Now you're outside the prison. And I know that you've been connected with people releasing. And I wonder if you could just kind of talk about the kinds of things you've seen in the past 6 months with, people that that have come out, and kind of the struggles or the challenges or barriers that they faced upon reentry. And then, I'd like to get a little bit further as why you think those challenges existed. And then looking back into prison, a little bit about from that experience, what you think we could be doing differently as a society and what we think we should be doing differently as a state. But do you mind sharing just a little bit about the kind of things you've seen with some of the people that that have come out and the challenges that they've had, and the gaps that exist in our community?
Yeah. Let me start with the last part of your question, though, about the prison part of it. And one of the things that came to my mind as you were talking there was, I mentioned in one of our solitary, probably our first solitary podcast, that, all prison is solitary confinement, right? And so, I mean, all prison is about disconnection from community and support. And so that's where we begin at the release process, is going from that into hopefully a more supportive kind of an environment outside of prison. And, you would hope that the system creates that for people. I know those of us that are out here, there's a network of us, a large network of us actually formerly incarcerated, so many with us here at OJRC, others beyond OJRC, who continue to try to be a support network for people getting out. And what that means a lot of time is we will try to find housing for them, find employment opportunities for them, find whatever programs they need to get into, that kind of thing, because the state sadly isn't doing a good job of doing that for people. They don't seem to really have any interest in doing that for people. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But for me, yeah, I would say, and I definitely believe now, but I even felt at the time that I was really blessed with a really soft landing. The settlement from the retaliation case was a big help. My family being there was a big help. Having a house waiting for me was a tremendous help. Having my job here was really, really important. I know that you encouraged me initially to take a little time before I started work, but I really felt it was important to start right away. So I got out on January 9th and started on the 15th. And the reason I did that mainly was because legal work and, the things we do here were familiar to me. there's things that have a comfort with, and so I felt like I expected that I would have chaos around me in basically every other aspect of my life, and I felt like, well, if I have work, I have something that can ground me. And I will say that I was right about that, but the first week I thought I was wrong about it. Because that first week, between the technology issues and just all of the information that was coming at me, that I felt like I was drinking out of a fire hose, and, you know, learning buses and just everything else. It just, by the end of that first week, I thought, oh, I made a mistake. I don't know if I can do this. But then the following week, it started to calm down, and it got better and better. And so then having the job did work like I thought it would work, where when I felt, out of control, for lack of a better word, with everything going on around me outside of work, I could kind of focus in on something at work and kind of like, okay, I know what I'm doing on something. It's like, I'm not stupid about everything in life. So it was really helpful. But anyway, yeah, I feel like I had a really soft landing. It was, really great. I mean, still today, I feel like my transition has been amazing. But what I have found is that I need to feel really grateful for that, because it's really rare. This is the exception, not the rule. I have a friend who works here at OJRC with us. He was super happy. He'd been out about a year before me. Super happy to show me his apartment. Wanted to take me, and we went down about, I don't know, 4 or 5 blocks down the street. I had no idea where we're going. And then when we get down, we're just getting down further and further and further into Old Town, and I'm like, it's just kind of feeling sketchier and sketchier. And I'm just kind of looking around and like, what's, the neighborhood and kind of the vibe, and kind of, everybody out there on the streets. And, anyway, we got to the building. It was a big building downtown. You go into the lobby, and I immediately felt like I was on the tier back in prison, because there were so many people that I'd seen in prison and that were kind of still in the prison mindset. And it had a prison feel to it, because that's where they were dumping a lot of people. But anyway, we go to the elevator, and, we get up to the 3rd floor, and he's all excited. He wants to show me his apartment that he's paying $600 a month for, and was really happy that's all he was paying, and puts the key in the lock and opens the door, and I couldn't help myself. I said, "Oh my God, you're living in a cell. What in the hell are you doing?" And because it immediately looked and felt like a prison cell. And, within a month of that, he moved out of there and is living in a much better place. And I'm thinking he likes it a lot better. But, that's not because of that necessarily, but just that was the place that, had I not had the support that I had, that I would have been there. Most people go there. And it does feel like a prison cell, and it just doesn't get you away from that environment, that it keeps you in the place of being a prisoner. It keeps you in, you are, I'm having trouble explaining the emotion of it. It keeps you locked in a place that is not about growing and thriving. It's more about surviving. And that was a successful example. I've had other guys that I went back to get somebody out. I got out on the 9th of January. I went back on February 19th. That was my first time back to the prison, to get somebody out that had been in for 45 years. legally blind, has a lot of health issues, cancer, all kinds of stuff like that. Nobody left in the world that cares about him. Well, we set up everything we could for him in Portland. We had housing for him. We had, programming lined up. He had, medical appointments that he needed to go for cancer at OHSU. So we got everything lined up here in Portland. And the authorities just said no. And they just decided they're going to send him over to another county. And then they figured out that they would put him in a halfway house in that county. And so, everything that we put together just evaporated. And so we went down to the prison and put him in the car and drove him 3 hours away to this place that they put him in the halfway house. And everything was good. Although at the time that the parole board had the hearing to release him, the DA was at the hearing saying, if you release him, we do not want him back in this county. But then the parole board put him in the county anyway, and said they had no choice but to do that, except for the fact that the statute says that if you have a job or a residence in another county, that they can transfer the county if they want to. They just chose not to do it. So they put him in a halfway house there, despite the DA making that objection about 4 months before his release. And everything seemed to be fine that day. And about 2 or 3 days went by, everything was fine. And then chaos hit. And what happened was the DA, who didn't want him over there, decided to go to the press and make a big deal that he was over there. And so he, legally blind, this is over on the coast, and he was, unbeknownst to him, he was just leaving the halfway house to walk down to the beach, and people were videotaping him and calling him a serial killer, which he wasn't, and making threats against him and putting all this stuff on social media. And the people that run the halfway house freaked out because they thought it was going to bring heat on everybody else in the halfway house. And so they got a hold of the parole officer, and the parole officer showed up and said, get in the car, and took him without any of his property and took him about an hour and a half away and dropped him in another county that he had no connection to, and said, you're here until further notice. Kept him there for 2 or 3 weeks, until they ultimately were able to make an arrangement with this county where we tried to start to have him at, and brought him back over here. So this was the third move in about his first 2.5 months out. They finally got him back here to Multnomah County, but of course, everything we had set up for him was gone. So then they put him into transitional housing here in Multnomah County temporarily, and told him he needs to find permanent housing here in Multnomah County in order to stay here. So disability services, veteran services, everybody was trying to find him housing. And he was on supervision in the other county. So Multnomah County wasn't supervising him. They were just holding him here for the other county. And yet a Multnomah County parole officer is just overriding, without even talking to him or looking at these residences, every residence that disability services came up with, veteran services came up, they would just say no. And so they gave him this 90-day transitional time here to find housing, and that came and went. And so that other county came over and got him and brought him back over to that other county again, put him in a trailer out in the middle of nowhere where he's disabled and can't get bus services and, get to medical appointments and that kind of thing. Put him in a shack, really, that is not ADA compliant. It looks horrible. And they said, well, if you can find permanent housing in Portland, you can go back there eventually. And so basically, this is one case that appears to be common to all the cases. And that is, not only do the officials that are in charge of parole and probation do nothing to help you succeed, it feels to me like they put barrier after barrier after barrier in your way in ways that make you unstable rather than stable. I mean, this guy's been moved 4 or 5 times at this point. And he's, I mean, he's like 74 now, and he's frail and has all these medical problems. He's had to take a bus 3 hours from the coast to Portland to see his doctors at OHSU like 3 times now since they've moved him. And it's just, I mean, there's so much more the system could do to help you, but at this point, I would just be happy if they would stop doing things to harm you. Just get out of the way and let us figure out something to help make somebody stable if you're not going to help. But instead, they're doing things to make people unstable. And it's really discouraging to see. And it's just, like I say, he's one case. I've seen it happen again and again and again. And it goes back to, I mean, I think I mentioned to you before, Bob, and I've told a few people, when I got out, there were 3 of us getting out, and you're in receiving and discharge. And you go in there and you put on the clothes that were sent in for you to wear out of the prison. And so I went in there and I got dressed into my clothes, and I was waiting for these other guys to get dressed into their clothes. And there's a guard in receiving and discharge. And he calls us, he says, "Hey guys, come on over here." And he's got a cart over here. And so we go over to this cart, and on the cart are 3 backpacks. He said, "Hey, we all want to give you one of these backpacks to take home with you today, as a going away gift, basically." And so basically, this is their effort to give you, a leg up as you leave the prison, I guess. Well, I opened the backpack that night, and the only thing in it was a rain tarp and a blanket. That's what the state is giving people as they leave the prison and patting themselves on the back for doing it, which is clearly saying, we know you're going to go live under a bridge and we don't care, and, have a nice life, and we'll see you when you get back. And that's kind of the attitude of many in the system.
I mean, what you described is horrific. I mean, no one should be treated this way. And the way this individual sort of bounced around now and been treated like a pariah, like someone that is unworthy of, a modicum of dignity. And everyone seems okay with it. They're just trying to make it someone else's problem, it seems like.
Yeah.
What is happening on the inside the months leading up to release? I mean, why is there not more support or any type of thinking or planning happening for an individual like this? I mean, is there? No, there's nothing.
Yeah, we have a law that says that the Department of Corrections is required to help create release plans, but they don't do it, and quite frankly, I'm glad they didn't help me. That's, if this is the help, thanks, but no thanks.
So there's really nothing. Is it when it says like DOC should help create release plans? Is it? I mean, it's very ambiguous because help could mean anything. It could be like you had a conversation in a hallway. It could be that you sat in someone's office and actually did some phone calls, put together some documents, that kind of stuff. Is it then just really up to the individual to do that on their own, as far as just be assertive and aggressive and work with whatever resources you have inside to kind of create your own plan? Or is there like, I've heard these, release counselors. I mean, do they do anything?
No. Release counselors are paper pushers. No, all counselors are paper pushers. But yeah, when I worked as a legal assistant inside and I was working with people going to the parole board, it was on me as the legal assistant to reach out to figure out which county they were trying to go out to, and to work with them to try to figure out, okay, what are your do you have housing options, as far as family goes, or that kind of thing. And if you don't, then trying to figure out, okay, what county are you going back to? What resources are available in that county? Then me reaching out to those resources by letter or phone call and saying, we got this guy that's getting out. Do you have space available? That kind of thing. And most of the times that those resources don't exist in the communities other than Portland and Eugene. Eugene has sponsors, which is the biggest halfway house in Oregon. And everybody wants to go to Eugene because of that. But because of that, Eugene can't take all those people. And so, it's really limited. But, when I was working as a legal assistant, if the person was going to Multnomah County or Eugene, that was the best chance I had for setting them up for success, because all the other counties, especially the small ones, had no resources available that you could reach out to that would help them. And so, somebody's going to get put up in a hotel for a few days, maybe, or they're going to be out there. Maybe that's why they give you the blanket and the rain tarp, is they know that, they just don't have any services available and nobody cares to make them available.
So, I mean, what you described essentially is, there's no system on the inside. It's kind of up to the person to do this. But when they get out, like you described earlier, how there's a community or network of individuals that are coming together to help support people. I mean, it's just like this individual you talked about. It's basically you and a couple other people that are trying to advocate on his behalf and try to figure out how to get him into a situation that makes sense. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, what does that work look like? And is it just because this is people are coming out and this is the reality they're facing, and then all of you are just kind of like scrapping together, trying to figure out on an ad hoc basis, like how to support each other?
Yeah, of course, everybody that's doing this has been through this themselves and knows what this is like, and is, understands what people need, and what is harmful to people. And we're trying to figure out, mainly how to get somebody housed, how to find them a job, how to get them the household utensils and all the other stuff they need, the dishes and the clothing and that kind of stuff. And so we've got a bunch of people that have come out before these guys that I've got a closet full of dishes and clothes right now in my house, and I've got some other furniture that I'm trying to pawn off on somebody. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of how we just kind of do this. And as we know someone's coming up for release, you typically know 3 or 4 months in advance. We start working to try to start nailing things down, and then give that to that person, and that person then takes it to their release counselor and says, here's what I have. And then it's up to that release counselor to say yes or no. We had one guy that got out today that we had housing for in Salem. Great, stable situation for him. They said no. I offered my place as a second option. They said no. And now they're putting him in a halfway house in another county, and they won't even tell him yet. He gets out this morning, and I take him to the parole officer this afternoon. And once he sees the parole officer this afternoon, then he's going to find out what halfway house he's going to be in, what his conditions are going to be at the halfway house, how long he's going to be allowed to be there, all that kind of stuff. They've known now for 4 months that he's getting out, but nobody has felt any need to make him aware of any of that information. And I don't know that they've thought anything about that information, until the day they had to come up with a halfway house for him. So we'll find out today what his situation looks like. But the reality is we had stable housing situations in place for him, and there was no reason for them to be denied. But a lot of times what that is each county is pitted against each other now. Part of this is they call it the Peter Courtney bill. Back when we had all of our prisons in Salem, Peter Courtney, a longtime state senator, decided he wanted to pass a law that required all prisoners to go back to the county that they committed their crimes in, or they resided in at the time of the crime, because they had a large number of inmate families that were moving to Salem during incarceration. And then once people got out of prison, they just stayed in Salem. And he didn't like that because he was a Salem lawmaker and he wanted to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yes. So now what happens with that is, if you are a Washington County inmate, Multnomah County doesn't have to take you and doesn't want to take you, because we have resources for Multnomah County inmates, not Washington County inmates. And so the only way you're able to get to that county is if you're not going to be a draw on their resources. Well, if you don't have housing in place, or you don't have, other services in place, they're feeling like you're going to be a draw on their resources. So they say no. And so that's typically what's going on, is that, and then of course, again, Multnomah County is where the resources are. These other counties don't have the resources. And so you don't want to go to these other counties that don't have resources. So you're trying to go to Multnomah County. And so, you have an influx of people trying to do that. So it's just, the system is, like every other aspect of our prison system and our legal system, it is broken in many, many ways. And it's been broken for a long time because people are just indifferent. They don't care. And if people recidivate, or when people recidivate, it's not if, when people recidivate, they're happy to bring them back and give them a bed in prison. And they're not going to do anything to help them not recidivate.
It's interesting because we should have a further discussion of this at some point, but I don't know, Zach, if you can speak to a little bit of this, but these hydraulics that are always at play, because we hear about, the motivation to create felonies because you charge people with felonies, they're doing more than a year's time. You get them off the county's sort of pocketbook, they're up in the state prison, and it's the state dime at that point. But then seeing these hydraulics play out at the release level as well, and even just hearing the story about Pierre Courtney, I mean, it is fascinating to hear that at the end of a huge motivating factor for driving a lot of this is, again, the pocketbook, just in these very insidious ways. And it's I think part of the reason why a lot of these services don't start when people are in prison is because it would cost money. And who's going to pay for it? Should it be the county? Should it be the state that pays for, those things when people are returning? But I don't know. It's just,
well, and I think there's still another piece of that, this whole thing, I still hear it now. People ask about programs in prison. Well, why do prisoners deserve programs in prison? Because they think prisoners don't deserve it. To me, it's like, do you deserve it? Do you want this person to have this program in prison so they're not as bad or worse than they were when they went into prison, when they move in next door to you? Well, it's the same thing on release. It's like, I think people think these guys don't deserve the help. These people, not just guys, these people being released from prison don't deserve the help because they did something to commit a crime.
Yeah. And I have an additional comment on that, but Zach, do you have any thoughts on these hydraulics, just from even your perspective of policy, seeing in the legislature?
Yeah, I mean, money rules the world, and the legislature, but also short-sightedness. Also, they think within biennium, funding essentially, and so they don't generally think longer term. And so I think those combined lead to decisions that don't necessarily benefit anyone, other than the people that are making money off of it. I mean, I don't know how they determine which halfway house people go to, but my guess is that there are contracts set up with the county. And so if they're not funneling people to halfway houses, those halfway houses aren't happy, and maybe they take their business elsewhere to other counties. And so I know in Massachusetts, when I was released, that was a very common thing where halfway houses were always bidding for further things. So I do think that, oftentimes avoiding costs, trying to offload costs to the state, or to some other jurisdiction, honestly, doesn't need to necessarily be the state, is a guiding factor, motivating factor for legislators. I think the short-sightedness is also frustrating. I mean, I think, Mark, a lot of what you're talking about, similar to why money is so important outside the walls. If people were releasing with more resources, not just programming, but also just funds, money. If people are spending years in prison and they actually are able to save money, put into an account, an actual, an actual interest-bearing account, um, then it would absolutely help their transition once they're out. And that's to me one of the most frustrating things is you pay people absolutely nothing in prison, and then they come out, and then everything you want them to do requires a significant amount of funding. And that's always been one of my frustrations, which is, and again, I think Mark hit the nail on the head with people don't deserve it, right? So then you start talking about raising wages, and they're like, well, why should they make any money in there? Well, because anything you want them to do when they get out is going to require money, which we all know. Those of us on the outside know exactly how much money it's going to cost. And when you have someone who's spent years making no money, essentially, what do you
Part
expect?
my soft landing largely was because of the settlement DOC paid me for the retaliation suit. Because I mean, without that, I would have really struggled. I mean, because you don't come out with any money otherwise, and I mean, how do you pay for anything out here? I mean, it's my rent's $16.50 a month, and yeah, you can add all of the other things on top of that. I mean, you absolutely need money, and most people come out with nothing.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, so when I worked as a family advocate at the Pathfinder Network, we would deal with a lot of individuals who would advocate for a bunch of individuals who would be releasing, right? And then they're mandated to do certain programming. So now they can't get jobs, nor any certain jobs they can't actually get because their programs are scheduled for certain times, and if they can't get to their programs, then they're going to be in violation of any supervision. And so now you just continue to throw up barrier after barrier after barrier, and if you could someone's in when there are fewer barriers, um, if you could help them get on the right track with money, it would make everything easier on the outside. And that means finding housing, participating in programming, finding education, helping others. I mean, it's wild that they think just suppress everything that people do while they're in prison and then just let them out and see how it goes.
Mm-hmm. One of the comments you made about programming that I just want to follow up on, and have additional comment on this as well, because now we're venturing into the, slave labor kind of conversation. But, it's interesting if you look at the hydraulics with money on programming, like a lot of the programs that come in are brought in by outside groups, through their own funding, largely. It's not that the state is paying them to do it, it's that they're securing funding from outside and then coming in and doing it, except when DOC then says, we don't want any of these people, we want our own internal staff. And then what they do is ask for a lot of money. And then those programs have no oversight. They're not effective. They basically become useless. And so it is this weird thing where, again, money is kind of driving it. Like it's a cost savings by having outside groups come in so DOC doesn't have to pay for it. But the moment those outside groups get out of line, I would even venture to say allow AICs to think independently or encourage that. Or, to speak up, and to engage in ways like we did, with public officials, you're no longer allowed to come in. They make obstacles, barriers, and challenges. They call it like process to vet things, or, they want to make sure everything is, that there's a thorough vetting process and everything is sort of being vetted properly. But basically, it's just like a bureaucratic nightmare that just funnels people away from it. But it's all about not spending money again,
It's all about the Benjamins. So
Yes.
what I'm hearing.
Yeah. But this thing of reentry, I just remember it must have been like 8 years ago. It was before the pandemic. There's a lot of energy around like bipartisan criminal justice reform, and this enthusiasm, this understanding of like we have to come together and ensure like people coming out are supported, and all of it, a lot of it was just like really focused on that moment you leave the prison door and around reentry.
The governor's reentry commission. Yeah,
exactly. Like, I mean, there was
that went nowhere.
Yeah, so much attention, so much money, grant funding, philanthropic dollars programs are all thrown at reentry. And we always had a challenge with that. Like we were supportive of it as an organization, but I think Julia was the one that really sort of like kept hammering this. She's like, reentry doesn't start at that point. Reentry starts at the moment you walk in the
Day
prison.
one, exactly.
And and she would always try to talk with like our allies or partners to say like we have to start talking about it this way. We have to frame this differently. We have to think about it differently. But
And
because
the prison never does. The prison
yeah,
is the last 6 months is
yeah.
when we'll look at people.
But because of all the financial incentives that were being thrown towards reentry and where it was being thrown as the moment you walk out the prison door, that's where people focused on, you know. So I don't know, it's just really interesting thinking back on that time where that was sort of the trending kind of issue. And now I don't know, I never hear about reentry anymore, to
Nope.
be honest. But to be fair, I don't hear about
It's not one of the three priorities of the governor anymore, apparently.
ooh, I wish we had some sound effects, you know, that we can but but yeah, you know, it is interesting. And you know, I think like the thing that you emphasized prior to us getting out on before we recorded this was, you know, you were really wanting to be cautious about not highlighting your own reentry experience as something that was the norm. And I think you've emphasized a couple of times that the way that you were able to come back into the community was the exception. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact of your own capacities, nature, you know, and then the support system that you had around you and the horrible treatment that resulted in the retaliation settlement, you know, that all culminated in a different type of experience. But, you know, I think based on the experiences of this organization and the clients that we work with, the people that we've worked with, we see the diversity of experiences that people have. And more often than not, they're more similar to what you described that other individual going through, you know, which is deprivation, you know, like we were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's setting people up for failure, but it's like, I mean, I don't know how. Just, I mean, you cannot, survive as a human being if you can't have some stability in your life. I mean, just basic needs being met, in terms of housing, in terms of, being able to feed yourself and clothe yourself and all that. And, the system should want to do at least that, but they don't seem to, and so like I said earlier, I mean, at this point, I would just be happy if they'd stop putting barriers in our way and get out of the way and let us help stabilize people. But, they seem intent on, creating instability rather than,
you know, and you know, you look at it even more because now they have rules about people who are recently returning from prison. I mean, returning into the community who released from prison can't come back into the prisons. There's like, and it seems to me like the people who have been out and have been able to like successfully reenter within like, it's like you, like in 6 months to come back in and to be able to work with people on reentry issues, that would actually have like probably the highest effective rate, right? Like to be able to say to someone, I was where you were at 8 months ago. This is what worked for me. Didn't work for me. This is what you need to think about, but they don't even allow for opportunities like that to occur or even think about that. They're foreclosing those opportunities because of the rules that they're making.
Yep, no, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the things that we've come to understand is with the Department of Correction, generally prison systems, the value system that drives it is about what you're talking about: disconnect, deprivation, isolation, asymmetrical power structures, or more eloquently, the way that you put it, a boot on your neck. I think is the way that it operates, and unless it's required to do so, it will not take that boot off your neck. So whether you're in prison or out of prison, like your friend there. So
yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of work still that has to be done, and I think a lot of further conversations. But any lasting thoughts that you have, Zach?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily want to, and I know they've made an appearance here, but I definitely don't want to let the legislature off the hook here. I mean, the the money, DOC gets their money. I mean that they are an agency that gets what they want in terms of funding. And therefore they have no incentive to think outside the box and how to better allocate money or to potentially prevent or help people not reoffend and return, right? Because for them, they actually want, I mean, arguably, they want people to return because they're getting funding for for a certain number of beds, and and then the legislature goes and approves a feasibility study for them to build a new prison. I mean, they are getting what they want, and I think just what's really frustrating is if there was a focus more on reducing the prison population. I mean, they always complain about a staffing. I know listeners maybe heard this before, but they always complain about a staffing issue. And if you actually brought the prison population down to what is clearly the realistic staffing that they can have, like clearly they're not going to attract more people. This has been way too many years of this. Bring the prison population down and start working on ways to give a lot of that money to programming, real world programming, both in the prison and then support for when people get out.
There was. Yeah, sorry. I was going to say there was a theoretical sort of thing like justice reinvestment that kind of existed with, I think, an analogous sort of theory that you're talking about. But again, the financial incentives kind of perverted it all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's what you're talking about, Zach, with the programming. My pet peeve is the substance abuse issue, right? So, I mean, 80% of our prison population have drug and alcohol problems. But the Secretary of State said in an audit in 2023 that 4% get drug and alcohol treatment. Yet DOC is not going to the legislature and saying, give us funding for 80% of our prison population to get drug and alcohol treatment, either in prison or in the community on supervision. And if they did, and that was made available to people, even if it was in the community, then you're going to eliminate one of the leading drivers of reincarceration right there. But they don't care to do that, and they're happy to have you come back.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of people don't realize that. I think a lot of people in the general public don't necessarily realize that there is a significant amount of individuals who aren't getting the substance abuse programming that they need. There's no sex offender treatment. And Mark and I were just talking about this.
40% or so are sex offenders and get no treatment in prison. How's that make any sense?
They get no treatment in prison and then struggle to get treatment outside of prison.
But right? Here's the thing. It hasn't always been this way. That existed in the 80s. It wasn't until we got tough on crime, which is dumb on crime, not smart on crime. We got tough on crime and said, let's eliminate sex offender treatment. Let's eliminate drug and alcohol treatment. Let's eliminate college classes because they don't deserve that stuff.
Let's force labor.
And let's make them work 40 hours a week.
I'll say again, this all connects to reentry because it's like once you enter the prison doors. But I got to say, I applaud you for opening up a Pandora's box right at the end of the episode. I think it's worthy of additional conversations just about programming and supports in prison and, connecting it to reentry. But, Mark, congratulations on your 6 months. It's been great spending the last 6 months or 10 years. It felt like 10 years in the 6 months of the kind of life that you've been living and enjoying and engaging, the community support, all the positive things you've been doing in the community. I mean, you just have a ton of energy, and it's been so fun to watch and work with you over these past 6 months. And, to hear about the struggles that other people are facing, I do hope that, these are things that we can continue to work on and help elevate and try to make better in this state. But congrats and thanks for all your work.
It's been a real pleasure, and I'm looking forward to continuing it. And now I have to go get somebody that's getting out after 35 years here in a few minutes and take him to a PO and see what kind of barriers they're going to put up today.
Well, good luck with that.
Yeah.
All right. We'll be back next week with another episode. We'll probably be back with another episode of Waxing Confidential and another episode of our solitary confinement if we can make it happen. Again, we want to see if we can get Ben and Mark to talk about what the social science says about solitary confinement. We've had a nice series thus far, sort of like describing the conditions that exist in prison here in Oregon. But I think we should now understand what the social science is saying about all that. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon.
This was a production of the Oregon Justice Resource Center. You can find out more about us at ojrc.info.